Okay, so in the first video for chapter 6, we kind of did an overview of plants and animals, just their general characteristics and comparing them a little bit. Then we did a video on the first two groups of plants. So we talked about the non-vascular plants, which included the mosses and their relatives, and we talked about the seedless vascular plants, which included the ferns and their relatives. So this video is going to focus on the first of the seed-bearing vascular plants, and so we're going to talk about the gymnosperms. Again, sperm means seed, and gymno means naked, so these are plants that produce seeds that are not enclosed in like a fleshy body like a fruit. Instead, most of these bear cones, so their seeds are found in cones. So they include conifers and cycads and ginkgos. So we'll move to the notes for gymnosperms. So of the seed-producing vascular plants, we said there's gymnosperms, which are the cone-bearing plants. So they have cones, male and female cones, but do not have fruit. Angiosperms, which means vessel seeds, are the flowering plants. So they produce seeds that are enclosed in a fruit, a protective vessel, and they also produce flowers. So this video will focus more on the seeds and on gymnosperms. We mentioned seeds briefly in the first video. We said how seeds contain the embryo and food supply, and they have a protective coating that will help provide protection from the harsh environment. So it keeps them from drying out, and it allows them to be dispersed in special ways. So some of them have really unique forms, so depending on how they're dispersed, maybe they have little burrs on them so they can latch easily onto an animal, or maybe they have little wings so that they'll be picked up easier by the wind. Maybe they have certain sweet fruit that attracts something to eat them, and then they'll be dispersed when the animal goes to the washroom later, that sort of thing. So they would be dispersed, so they'll go somewhere else, and then when conditions are just right, they can germinate into a plant. Ultimately, the seed enables plants to reproduce sexually without having to depend on water to keep the gametes from drying out and to get the sperm to the egg. So we'll take a look at the gymnosperms, so the cone-bearing plants. Gymnosperms have true roots, stems, leaves, and they also have vascular tissue. They produce seeds, so that's why we called them seed-bearing vascular plants. They have separate male and female cones. Most people don't know that until they maybe take a course like this. And they have a protective bark that helps protect their stem and reduces water loss. So they have certain features, and you can read some more of them in this section in the book, but you should have some idea. One of your objectives is to know some of their adaptations that help them to winter well. For instance, around here we have a lot of evergreen trees, or a lot of conifers that have adaptations that allow them to withstand the harsh winters. For instance, they're pyramidal in shape, so they're shaped like a pyramid, and they have flexible branches, both of which these features allow them to withstand when snow builds up. So it allows the snow to fall off them easier. They have needles, which are specialized leaves that have low surface area to reduce evaporation or water loss. And while it looks like they don't lose their leaves because they remain evergreen, they are actually continually growing and reproducing new ones all year. So think of some examples. Think of the Christmas trees that you might go out to get, for instance. So pine trees, spruce trees, fir trees, and ginkgos and cycads are other types as well. In terms of reproduction, we said they make male and female cones. So the female cone tends to be a little bigger, and it's often called the seed cone because the seed actually is produced in the female cone. The pollen cone, or male cone, produces pollen, so that's why we sometimes call it the pollen cone. Sometimes we call it a strobili because it's shaped a little different. So inside of the pollen cone, the pollen grains are going to be made, which will develop, or they have cells that will develop into the sperm. So when conditions are right, the pollen will be carried by wind to the female cone. So inside of the female cone, the ovules will be found, and the outer part of the ovule will become the seed, the tough coating of the seed. But inside of the ovule are the parts that will become the egg. Okay, so there's a megasporangium that makes a megaspore that will produce the egg. In the pollen cone, we have the microsporangium, which produces the pollen grains. And this is the diagram that you should have, bigger version of. And again, there's animations for all of these. They're awesome for you to visualize what's happening. Some of them have a little bit more detail than what we really need to know at this level, but it's kind of nice to actually see what's happening. Okay, so here's the ovulate cone, or the seed cone, or female cone. You'll hear it called different things. Okay, inside of it, you see the ovule, and inside of the ovule will be the megasporangium that produces the megaspore that produces the egg. So in here will be the egg. The pollen cone will release pollen grains that'll be carried in the wind and land near the ovule. Okay, so here's the female gametophyte making the egg. Again, meiosis has happened, so the sperm that are made in the pollen grains and the egg that is made in the ovule are haploid. When the pollen grains land, they form a pollen tube. So this green line I drew was the pollen tube that will form from where it lands up to where the egg is. And then the sperm can swim down through or up through to where the egg is. So 2 sperm will actually swim, but only one will fuse with the egg. So only one will fertilize the egg. The other one will just be broken down. So after fertilization, we have a zygote. And as soon as the zygote starts to divide, it's called an embryo. Okay, so after fertilization, the two have united. It's now diploid zygote that becomes an embryo inside of the seed. So the ovule outer part becomes the seed coat. And then inside is the developing embryo and some food stuff for it. Okay, so here's the seed cone. When the timing is right, it'll kind of open out so that the seeds can be dispersed in the wind. So here's the seed, and it's got a wing, so it can be dispersed easily in the wind. Okay, it will land somewhere, and when the conditions are right, it will germinate to form a seedling, which will grow into a mature sporophyte, or tree, which will bear male and female cones. And the cycle can happen again. So the seed, when it's matured, usually takes several months to 2 years. So they don't just happen all the time. And these are just some other graphics. So if you Googled some graphics for gymnosperm reproduction, you'd see all these different ones, which is kind of good for you to practice looking at different ones because they're showing the same process, but in different views. Okay, so You should be able to pick out where meiosis happens, where fertilization happens, where the gametophyte is, where the sporophyte is, pollen tube formation, that sort of thing. Don't forget to watch the animation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anytime.